Hello everyone, and welcome to another ENRICH in China webinar. Today we will be focusing on a very current theme, robotics. So what robotics bring to the world, focusing on Europe, China, and the USA. My name is Mariana Marques. I'm an international consultant at SPI, Sociedade Portuguesa de Inovação, which is a coordinator of the ENRICH in China Center that is organizing the webinar today. Now I will briefly present you the agenda. So I will be providing some introductory words about our speaker and about ENRICH in China, namely mentioning a couple of upcoming events that we'll be hosting in the following weeks. Then we will have our keynote presentation of today, what robotics bring to the world, Europe, China, and the USA, presented by Ms. Andra, Keay, Managing Director of Silicon Valley Robots. And then at the end, we will have the questions and answers session as usual. So I will now take the opportunity to inform you that you can type in your questions in your GoToWebinar panel. So you have the questions section. You should go there, type in your questions. You can do it throughout our presentations, and then at the end we will be replying to all the questions. So to just give you some words about our speaker of today, Ms. Andra Keay. She's a managing director at the Silicon Valley Robotics enterprise. She's an expert and experienced futurist, founder of the Robot Launch Global Startup Competition, also founder of the Robot Garden Marques space, and Woman in Robotics. She's a mentor, investor, and advisor to startups, accelerators, and think tanks in this area. And she's also a visiting scholar at the University of California's C3's People and Robots Research Group. So now for our brief presentation of ENRICH in China, I would like to present here in our work at ENRICH in China. So we aim to create and enhance synergies with EU initiatives and STI infrastructures, particularly those with a physical presence in China. So ENRICH in China aims to work as an interface that links EU organizations with Chinese counterparts, customers, and partners. So our main clients are divided into three main groups. So these are research actors, innovation actors, and business actors. So these range from universities to innovation agencies, and also to companies, business associations, chambers of commerce. So we interact with all these types of different actors. Our services are divided into 5 main categories that aim to enhance your knowledge, equip yourself, establish your strategy, engage your network, and also help you to expand your reach. The services within these 5 general categories are STI intelligence services, training services like these webinars that we host, workshops. We also provide consultancy and coaching, cooperation enabling events. We organize regular missions to China, although now we are not able to do it, but it's a regular service that we provide. And we also have our soft landing and co-working zones that I will be also mentioning in the following slide, which are organizations that are based in China and that provide support services, as I mentioned, especially soft landing and co-working spaces that can help you enter the Chinese market. So at the moment, we have these 6 soft landing zones in these 6 different regions. We are increasing the number of organizations that are within our network. You can check the website as it's appearing on your screen and read and learn more about these 6 soft landing zones that we currently have, and be informed about upcoming ones that we will be also including in our network soon. So just for wrapping up our presentation of the Day of ENRICH in China, I would like to inform you about some upcoming events that we will be hosting. So next week on December 2nd, we will be hosting a workshop /webinar, because this is going to be happening in China, in Beijing, on a physical location, and it is going to be transmitted live via a webinar format to anyone interested in attending. This event is the China-EU Health Dialogue seminar. This is going to be hosted together with another European funded project, the Senate project, that is focused on healthcare cooperation between China and Europe. Also on 9th of December, we'll be co-organizing a workshop about Sino-Danish Child-Friendly Community Forum. This is organized in partnership with Innovation Center Denmark. And is also this event is also accounting with the participation of UNICEF representatives in China. So on the 9th and 10th of December, we will also be hosting another workshop focused on Sino-EU STI cooperation by partnering with one of our regional hubs in Hangzhou. This is also another category of organization that we have in the community of ENRICH in China, the regional hubs. We have one in Hangzhou, another one in Shenzhen, and a third one in Chengdu. You can also learn more about this in our website. And just to conclude, we will be launching a database in December. This will be also available through our website. It's not launched yet, but it will be very soon. This is a digital guidance that is in the form of an industry-focused database. So this database will provide information about different industries with different focuses and where they are located in China, and how you can get to know more about them and possibly get in touch with them. All this information is available in our website, china.enrichcenters.eu, so you can go there to learn more, or you can also get in touch with us through our email, china@enrichcenters.eu. So thank you so much for hearing my presentation. Now I will be now passing on the word to our speaker of today, Miss Andra Keay. So Andra, I will be sharing your screen now.
Yes, indeed. Oh, great. Let's see if I can get this into presentation mode without losing it all. I think you can see my screen again.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Now it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, and I don't know how many of you are involved in robotics or indeed at all familiar with robotics, but you probably hear phrases like the robotics industry bandied about all the time. And myself, I've been managing a Silicon Valley Robotics, which is a cluster organization. A coalition of robotics companies came together in 2010 to form Silicon Valley Robotics because they could see a new wave of robotics coming. And it turns out Silicon Valley is precisely at ground zero for a lot of this. In fact, we are, if we look at investment figures, we are the home to the most new robotics in the world. Whereas if we look at robot industry figures, then you wouldn't think that there was any robotics in the United States at all. And that's why I've always had such trouble trying to understand what the robotics industry is. As someone who was previously researching the rollout of robotics into society. And it reminded me of Thomas Kuhn's famous paradigm shift. And in fact, I went back to read through this recently, and he explains the paradigm as really an organizational method, and that you don't incrementally change in a paradigm, you go through a period of confusion where nothing seems to fit the emerging evidence until a new paradigm emerges that can explain things. And then, of course, what happens is that the people who write the textbooks make it all explainable, and it appears as though scientific knowledge has progressed smoothly from discovery to discovery, or from paradigm to paradigm. And this is certainly not the case in robotics. What we're seeing is a great paradigm shift. And in fact, this was something that Dr. Gil Pratt, when he was running the DARPA Advanced Robotics projects, he called a Cambrian explosion in robotics. I might even have a slide of that in a minute, but Robotics 1.0 was the robotics industry for 50 years. It is where the history of robotics is. It's where the standards organizations are. It's where you collect sales statistics and you have leading companies that clearly understand what they produce and where their market is. This is the industry that has incremental changes and has had a predictable growth of 12 to 15% per annum over pretty much most of the history. In fact, here what you see is it's economic downturns that affect the productivity of the robotics industry. We've gone from one standard to more than 30 standards, but again, this has really been incremental changes. What we're starting to see now is that what I call Robotics 1.0, it doesn't explain what is happening in robotics now. And the standards that are being developed to suit Robotics 1.0 are completely irrelevant to the majority of the robotics companies that I work with, and that you're going to be seeing in much closer detail, most likely, particularly because this robotics industry has primarily been kept in factories behind cages and walls, because it's not really been a people-friendly kind of robotics. Now, this has still been an industry that reached $48 billion in value last year, but it's usually categorized by the type of robot arm that is being produced, or it's categorized by the task that a robot arm is doing. So is it welding? Is it doing materials handling, which is the majority of the tasks? Is it doing, which tasks? And then the customer or factory that it's been using, which is a very narrow segment of the manufacturing industry. Now, again, this is what you usually see when people talk about understanding the robotics industry. And in running the Silicon Valley Robotics Cluster organization, I've found it very strange that none of the economic activity that our cluster is involved in appears in these charts. So I've come up with a new paradigm explanation, which is that we have Robotics 1.0, and that is the old robotics industry. And then we have Robotics 2.0. Now, as you can probably see from these charts as well, it's actually only affected by the economic periods around 2009 and 2019. Otherwise, we're seeing incremental expansion in the number of robots in the world. And if you are involved at all in the Robotics 1.0 industry, I think you need to be a little bit worried about the role that your major market has taken. I mean, we all knew that, 50% of Robotics 1.0 robots are being used in the automobile industry. Slowly, consumer electronics has been increasing the share of work that's being done, which is great. But China in the last 5 years has gone from being somewhere around the 5th and 6th in terms of robotics to being the largest customer of all robotics companies, and has been producing domestic robotics companies as well. Now, a lot of the percentages of incremental growth that the Robotics 1.0 industry is having at the moment isn't the expansion of robotics, because you're not really counting the new robotics industry. It's been the expansion of the old robotics industry in China. And there are some indications that that growth is plateauing, primarily because China has grown its own robotics industry. So if you're in Robotics 1.0, I would worry. Now, I think I mentioned the tasks, so I'll just move quickly through, and the industries. And what I want to point here is that the world's most well-informed statistical body, the International Federation of Robotics, has such a large 20% to 25% this year of the clients for robots are unknown. That's losing touch with where your robots are going in a pretty significant fashion. So what I want to do is show you my process of mapping, because as well as having what was the robotics industry, there were a couple of little side categories in the International Federation of Robotics notes, and they were considered very much side categories. There was this area of service robotics, which really meant anything that wasn't in a factory. And that's where a lot of the Silicon Valley robotics companies were. And then the personal robots, the robots in the home, and that is largely the robot vacuum cleaners, which is now one of the 27% of all vacuum cleaner sales are robot vacuum cleaners. And that's pretty massive. That's where we've got, last time I checked, it was 12 million. I think it's probably up to 18 million robots in the homes. So it's the most widely distributed robot in the world. But the profit margin in robot vacuum cleaners is tiny. So when you look at the actual value of that industry, in 2010, it was 1 billion. And so when I started working with Silicon Valley Robotics and we tried to map the industry and understand why people weren't really tuned in to what was happening in Silicon Valley, it was because the sorts of things we were doing were tucked away in these side categories for the International Federation of Robotics and the Robotics 1.0 industry. And when you looked at the total value in these sections, it was 1 billion, 3 billion, compared to what was 18 to 20 billion in the robot arms. So we were very much the small fish in quite a large pond. Move forward 10 years, and you'll see that while the Robotics 1.0 industry has grown enormously, the amount of unknown within that robotics industry has also grown enormously, and the service robotics industry has grown at a much greater rate. In fact, growth in service robotics is more like 50% per annum, and in personal robots or home robots, 33%. And it's really impossible to zero in on those percentage figures because we're seeing the emergence of new categories in these areas that are having things like 500% per annum growth, and that didn't exist before. And that answers some of the question about this unknown category. So really the robotics that I work with looks like this. And a lot of it is not factored in because it is non-revenue producing at this stage. We've seen an explosion in the amount of investment into robotics that is only just starting to return revenue. And I've been very close to this development because in Silicon Valley, the majority of our robotics companies were equity funded and are now growing terribly rapidly. So I've put together a different set of figures describing where the value in robotics is at the moment and the overall robotics, the Robotics 2.0 industry, which is including the revenue from the known robotics industries in industrial, service and personal robots. That comes to about $74, $75 billion. Equity investment into robotics, drones and self-driving vehicles was around 30 billion last year, 33 billion quite likely. And if we value the mergers and acquisitions activities as well, then you can see cumulatively, excluding what's happening in the stock market, there's $150 billion of value per annum in the new robotics industry. And again, the old robotics industry really only cares about the figures in the known categories. And they've been primarily used to incremental growth. Everybody else, all of the other industries, care about what is happening in these new category creators, because these are the robotics that are coming to disrupt your business. This is where robotics is spreading out to be an enabling technology in every industry. And yet very few people are able to identify what's happening. This is where I said it's been fantastic actually being part of the commercialization process in an emerging cluster in Silicon Valley, because we are right where those dragons are, and we are getting a fantastic view at what's actually happening. I used to call investors to say, hey, you know, robotics is going through, you're going to see a wave of robotics. Investors started cold calling us in 2015 to say, hey, they were investing in robotics, and, you know, it was super interesting, and let's have a chat. Now, having given you, I hope, a bit of a framework to understand what people talk about when they talk about the robotics industry. If they're inside the old robotics industry, then their viewpoint of the robotics industry is very constrained. If they're a policymaker, if they're running any other sort of business, what they care about is this new robotics, the robotics 2.0 industry, and what's happening in that, because this is where all of the disruption is coming from. And I will give you a little bit of a sense for where you go to find some of these figures. It's, as always with statistics, it's apples and oranges. Everybody calculates things differently, so you can't get, you know, direct equivalent. But for example, the International Federation of Robotics, which is a Robotics 1.0 group, is now really interested in the number of startups and the growth in service robotics. They predict that 1 in 5 service robotics companies is a startup, and that there are 377 of them in Europe. Good on them for looking, but they haven't found them all, that is for sure. The Robot Report is now very interested in tracking these emergent robotics industry. And so, for example, in 2019, they tracked 382 deals, which was involving 366 unique robotics companies. And certainly in Silicon Valley robotics, we track 651 companies at the moment, of which 300 were founded post 2015, so would be considered a startup in the International Federation of Robotics terms. However, in Silicon Valley terms, some of those startups have gone from 0 to $1 billion rather rapidly. And so that makes them quite a giant. It's not a little bootstrapped startup that is still 3 people struggling to survive. Those are venture-backed behemoths, unicorns, as you call it. And so they're really quite a different category of startup as well. And those are generally found in the medical robotics space and in the self-driving vehicle space. So yes, Gil Pratt talked about a Cambrian explosion in robotics, and it's really based around the same thing as the biologic explosion in Cambrian period in the evolutionary history of the Earth, which came about because very small organisms developed vision. And once they developed vision, it really sped up the chase food, catch food, run away from being eaten cycle of evolution. And the number of strategies that life forms took on to try to survive became incredibly varied. And that's what we're seeing right now with robotics because of vision. So when I talk about vision in robotics, we're not simply meaning stereoscopic camera vision like people have. We're actually talking about all of the sensor technology that allows robots to localize and navigate in the world. And the reason that we're having, sensors and the desire to navigate robots have been around for a long time, and we have had mobile robots. By and large, those mobile robots have been like trains. They've operated on tracks, and the only thing that they can really control is stop, go, back. So if something goes into their paths, they can stop. They can't leave the tracks and go around. Now we're talking about, and this is a change simply in the last 10 years, in having robots that are able to operate more like cars and navigate around objects. They're freer in where they go. In fact, cars are restricted to roads. What we're seeing now is mobile robots everywhere, sidewalks, in warehouses, in factories, on the roads. And it's because we have pulled together the sensors that allow robots to localize and navigate with the real-time computation that can be sent back and handled in the cloud, but can also be handled locally, allowing for some really immediate decision making happening on the device. And this ability to sense has other kind of corollaries. It's going to make these kind of fixed arm robots much, much smarter through the addition of camera technologies. So the value in the robotics 1.0 industry is going to advance incredibly. And it's going to allow collaborative robots, which means robots that are safe to operate around humans. And, you know, by and large, I would still say always look for very small and light robots to be collaborative, because physics, mass is still kind of a bit of a, can hurt. But by and large, we're able to give robots the ability to be safer around people. And we're also starting to see a lot more in terms of soft robotics as well, but I'll get to that in a second. We're seeing an incredible expansion in the range of surgical procedures that are being attempted with robots, whether it's replacing hips or replacing knees, whether it's doing prostate surgery, whether it's doing lung biopsies and other measurements, for example, Auris Health. This is a prostate surgery. And we're really starting to take advantage of the ability to control small tools and do minimally invasive surgery within the body cavity. And part of this comes about through haptic feedback, through giving operators the ability to understand what is happening, not just through vision. So it's always about more sensors. And what we're going to see is robot teleoperation. And I think you can see Jeff Bezos there, from the founder of Amazon, is really enjoying this recent demonstration of haptics, synthetic skin from SynTouch, and shadow hand robotics there. He's gone on to acquire one of those companies just recently. But robot teleoperation is going to allow people to work more safely in difficult, dangerous areas. And we have currently, for example, the ANA Avatar X Prize is halfway through its 4-year cycle, and it's looking for a robot experience that would allow a person to be really somewhere else. And that could be for a disaster response task, or it could be for a business meeting. And ANA, the Japanese airline, is looking at reinventing travel. But of course, exoskeletons offer so much in terms of industry. And there's a half dozen exoskeleton companies in the Silicon Valley area, and I know there's at least a half dozen other companies globally, if probably 18 at this point in time. And some are functioning, some are really focusing on workplace, and others are functioning on giving people the ability to walk, providing other, incredible services. And most of the time we think about robots and we look at something like a Boston Dynamics and this amazing somersault, and we don't realize that this is still a research robot. It doesn't have an application in the real world. They make fantastic videos and they further the research into bipedal robots. And so it means, I'm sorry, Sophia, but I don't actually see a practical role for humanoid robots in our world. In fact, I would argue that humanoid robots are a mistake. They really distract us from what robots can be doing. That is incredibly useful in solving global problems. Now, hardcore roboticists will still make an argument that quadrupeds or bipeds are far better at moving in rough and uneven terrain, as evidenced here with Spot going upstairs. But this is still the most fun I've seen anybody have with a Spot robot. And I've seen people trying to deploy it on construction sites, as you saw in one of the last videos, and really trying to work out where those robots are useful. And that's Adam Savage from Mythbusters. He just had a good time, because what wouldn't you love doing with a robot dog but letting it take you for walks? One of the companies we work with is Agility Robotics, and they are certainly looking at commercializing bipedal robots, and they've got a partnership with Ford now. And they're talking about deploying delivery robots for last mile delivery service. I'm not certain that this is going to be any more than a really fancy ad. But in the meantime, I'm watching a proliferation of agricultural robots. And that means that this field of robotics, pardon the pun, is starting to see real traction. And this happens to be an Australian robotics company, because coming from Australia, I still like seeing the Australian robots. But there are many robotics companies doing agricultural robotics, both in Europe as part of the funding programs here, and within Silicon Valley and other parts of the US Midwest and around. And once you've solved navigation and vision, then you can really just kind of combine with any other machinery on the farm. But what is fascinating is that this opens up some other areas. For example, this is FarmBot. It's an open source consumer product. You can buy your own FarmBot, or you can build your own and download all of their open source libraries. And it's led to a community effort building Farm OS, the open source operating system for people to manage their own backyard robot plots or larger farms. And then you also have the development of the urban or indoor farm. And this is Ionox, I think, one of the Silicon Valley companies, but you'll see a number of companies around the world. In fact, I think there's a nice partnership between China and a small US aquaculture company. And so the Chinese company is bringing the robotics automation, and the US company is bringing the plant tending knowledge. One of my favorite forms of horticultural robotics, though, is the dairy industry. And this is one of the most advanced areas of livestock tending with robots. And every aspect of the care and feeding of cows 24/7 now has robots that can be deployed. And it doesn't mean that farmers aren't useful. It actually frees up farmers to do the intelligent labor rather than the manual labor. And the cows are very happy with this idea. Like, they've worked out that they go over there to get let into pasture. They go into these stalls to get food. They go there to get milked, and here to get their back scratched. And you actually see the cows lining up to get milked twice as often as they were when it was under the control of people who had limited schedules. And the hormones in the cow's milk are showing less stress. So you literally have happier cows. And I think, given that our farming population is an aging demographic, we need to do all we can to make better farms. I mentioned soft robotics. It's one of the significant technologies. Ultimately, it's been around for quite a while, but it's only now that it's being able to be commercialized, as we're starting to see robot arms move into new areas. And a soft robot gripper like this makes something like the handling of foodstuffs possible in a way that really wasn't as possible before. So it widens the options for traditional food processing. And we can start to talk about things like the textile industry. In fact, I'm going to have to put a slide in here of Sobo, for example. So there are a number of robotics companies attempting to tackle the clothing industry through robotics. Of course, the giant robotics warehouses are found in the logistics center. And this is Ocado. This is a fruit and vegetable grocery store. So talk about food handling. But we see this with Amazon, we see this with Alibaba, and all the major e-commerce companies have incredible robotics automation. And that is giant scale infrastructure that's automated, that's using large scale robots. And that's also using mobile robots in more creative ways to bring the goods to the person rather than the person going to the goods. And this is rippling out from the back of the supermarkets to the front of the supermarkets, where we're seeing inventory scanning as probably the most, that's the job that interests retailers most at the moment. But one of the significant drivers from the retail industry is lack of labor in things like, say, overnight areas. And we're seeing a real push towards micro-fulfillment centers as well. At the same time, there's a lot of support for some of these autonomous delivery options. This one is Neuro. I think Neuro just had a huge funding event. And of course, you have all the big players looking at various forms of delivery robots for that last mile of delivery, whether you had the agility robot delivering the package all the way to the door, or whether you have things like the sidewalk delivery robots. There are some other ones that are like Neuro that are on the street, again, that requires the person to come to it. Everybody's exploring these options, and we're starting to see comparatively affordable robot base. This is a new company from the Silicon Valley region called Hello Robot, and this is a stretch robot. The goal is it's a very affordable arm that is teleoperated, and it's aimed at a person with disabilities or an aged person who may have trouble with some tasks, but may be able to teleoperate a robot to take care of some of those tasks. And it's so much more affordable than any of these systems were. And you say you don't have robots cooking meals yet, but we're starting to see the emergence of automation type restaurants. This is Spice, I think, which is kind of similar to Momentum machines, which became Creator, the hamburger restaurant, and they completely re-engineered the process of making hamburgers so that it could be mechanized at every stage. Whereas on the flip side, you have Miso Robotics that has Flippy, the robot burger chef, which is looking at just replacing one or two tasks, but doing it in the fast food restaurant industry. And these are the robots that we see the most of, although there's still one of the smaller categories, and it's the robot concierge helping you perform a task. And we're seeing those crop up, particularly in places like airports and in hotels. And the one that is attracting the most money, though, is the bets on self-driving vehicles. Now, Tesla is now, I think Elon Musk is the second most wealthy person in the world. So Tesla stock is doing very, very well. But we have a Tesla, and I am not interested in doing level 5 autonomous driving in it. There is still far too much. You know, you could say that this is 99.5% safe, but in the automobile industry, your goal is 99.99999% safe. And we're not really there yet. But there is a lot of commercial pressure to do autonomous driving in some other fashions. And this is where I personally think we're going to get the breakthroughs. And for example, in this instance, you have a driver in the front truck, but you have peloton. So you have automated following, and your automated systems are capable of following at a very close, to the truck in front. But you still have a human driver making some of those unusual circumstances that autonomous systems can't yet deal with. For example, when a famous crash in Florida a couple of years ago happened because a large semi-trailer like this turned in front of the autonomous vehicle, and it had pure white sides. It didn't have any signage or anything on it. And the autonomous vehicle misinterpreted that as sky over the horizon, instead of that is a big white truck in front of me. So as long as we still have those corner cases and we don't have autonomous driving to 99.9999%, then certainly I feel a lot better about something like pelotoning, or developing certain areas of freeways or roads that we know are autonomous drive zones, and clearly indicating that. And indeed, many pundits believe that we're going to have autonomous air travel, before we have autonomous road travel. And there are very serious plans underway with Uber that was hoping to roll out autonomous air taxis in Melbourne next year, amongst other cities. And they're trialing some in New York. And Dubai is pushing forward with some of these plans significantly. So we're going to see a lot of airborne work. And while the focus, always the media attention, is on the passenger ones, we're going to actually see cargo drones taking off before the passenger ones. That is actually, I think, a flying car, not a cargo drone. So I'm going to have to put in one of the cargo drones instead. And one of my favorite use cases for robots is the space industry, because to go to space, we really are going to need all the robots we can get. It's not a safe environment for people. And yet I do believe that our future lies in moving the human race to multiple locations. And, you know, already there are more robots in the solar system and in space than there are people. So the robots have colonized other worlds to help us in our expedition to leave the Earth, hopefully leave the Earth a better place. But this is where robots are, and the most advanced robots that we can develop, this is where they really have a fantastic role to play. And this is one of the regions that I hope to see a lot more global cooperation as well in the future moving forwards. So I look forward to working together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Andra. So let me just put on my screen for our attendees. So I will now encourage everyone once again to write down your questions in the chat or questions section in your GoToWebinar panel. So let's see if we are going to receive some inquiries from our participants. So I hope you're seeing my screen now. As we wait for our participants to write down some questions, I can ask you something, Andra.
Sorry, I've just put
yes.
the Silicon Valley Robotics website there. I realized I didn't have it on the title, on the closing slide. Certainly you can see more there about what.
Okay, thank you. Let me just, I think our attendees are not seeing the website. I'm going to send it now to the entire audience. Okay.
Oh yes.
So you're welcome. Okay, so for everyone, you can check the chat section. You have there the website of Andra's organization. So we already have one question from the audience, but I will put you mine first. As you know, our organization tries to promote a cooperation between Europe, China, and also with other regions of the world. So I would ask you what kind of cooperation is your organization involved with, or if it is with other companies around the world.
Very much so, and we are a very small organization, I'll have to say. And one of the things that we've done is provide a soft landing pad for robotic startups coming from other parts of the world. So in fact, I am based in a hardware and prototyping a working space where we have 32,000 square feet, and we're also the home to a couple of European robotics companies, and temporarily 1 or 2 Australian companies. These are companies that have reached out to me, and they are able to, in a couple of these instances, set up their US business through our umbrella location. And at other times they're just coming to visit. They might be looking for investment, or they're, you know, that it's just part of the startup journey. And I like to say that Silicon Valley should not be the end of any startup's journey. There's so many good reasons for growing your robotics company in other regions. The contest for talent in Silicon Valley is very tough, and people expect to get paid very well. Like, you know, sadly in robotics, everybody is highly valued by tech companies who don't necessarily give them terribly interesting jobs. But you can do very well if you're coming, say, from Adelaide in Australia, and you have access to your local environment. But your local environment there might give you access to university postdocs and some local funding, but it will really not help you terribly much with raising a larger venture round, or perhaps part of your expanding into other markets. So what I've found is we provide this kind of soft landing pad for startups from other regions. And we also now have worked at being a bridge for larger companies, say global multinationals that may perhaps be based in Japan, for example, has some really big construction companies. And the construction companies in Japan are used to doing every sort of construction. So they do apartment buildings and residential development, as well as doing commercial buildings, as well as doing infrastructure. Whereas in the United States, that's quite fragmented. And you have people that are building single home residentials. You have people that are building multi-home and / apartment / commercial. And then you have people that are really building commercial. And then you have people that are building infrastructure. And so for a construction robotics startup in the United States, you're dealing with a fragmented marketplace that is not that interested in investing in research and development. Whereas I can connect them with some of the giant Japanese construction companies who are interested in investing in research and development. And in fact, they've set up R&D headquarters in Silicon Valley so that they can meet with early stage companies. There's a lot happening in terms of the digitization of the built environment, and now in terms of the automation or the roboticization of aspects of heavy machinery, and the rethinking of some construction. One of my favorite startups in Silicon Valley, for example, is called Dusty Robotics, and they've rethought the printer. They've looked at the construction industry, and they were looking at a whole sort of problem points, and they've decided that one of the biggest problem points is that these days plans are becoming incredibly precise, and people can share plans online and comment and change things. But once you get to the building side, you're going from the plan to people measuring out tapes and measuring things and making paint marks all over the place. And this is where things get mismeasured, and the plans get wrongly placed on the real world. And you know, you need to have the surveyors in all the time to check where the localization is. Now, that's actually something that you can do, tight localization with robotics. And then wouldn't it be great if you had a robot that could read the plans and then effectively do the chalk marks or the paint marks as well? So they've developed a little building site printing robot that goes around the, you know, when a floor go around, and it can print the plans for everything that is supposed to be there, and it's accurate. So that's just a wonderful new thing at the intersection of the digital world and the real built environment. There are other things that you can just make those changes by looking at the machinery that you already have and making it smarter with more sensors. But I find Dusty Robotics epitomizes the imagination of saying, but what else can we do?
Yes, very, very interesting example, Andra, thank you. We already have 2 questions from our participants, so I will read you the first one from Gaia Irilu. So what would be the opportunities and challenges of integrating robotics with AI and IoT? This is the question.
Great. Well, I think that robotics is on that spectrum. And if you look at IoT, it's really putting in place some of the essential communication and computation and sensing. It's really where you're testing these things out in a comparatively simple configuration. And if you look at it that way, then robotics is an extension along that same spectrum. And we're using sensing, and we're using computation, and we're often using communication as well. And all of those things were really developed, and the protocols and standards are being developed through IoT. So robotics is building on the foundation work of IoT. Now, when it comes to AI, okay, there's a lot of AI that's still very stupid AI. It's really programmatic. It's saying, in fact, someone was just sharing on my feed a picture of AI sorting tomatoes, and they said, this is like sea green hit. You know, it's programmatic rather than intelligent. But the thing is, that's super effective. That was sorting a whole heap of tomatoes at very high speed. You often don't need much intelligence. Where you really need intelligence is the moment you're making some kind of unstructured decision, where your environment is messy, where you are doing, where you have more variables. And I don't think we have many occasions when we're actually good at incorporating that. But where you see the advances in natural language programming, in computer vision, and initially in SLAM, in localization and mapping, those are where we see the fruits of AI really having an impact in robotics. So we're not quite there yet, but when we can talk to our robots and have them understand us, and anybody with a voice assistant knows that we're working on it, but we're not really there yet. Or if we have text or plan recognition, that's great. Or that ability to navigate in the real world, that's really coming out of the computer vision, the localization and simultaneous localization and mapping for SLAM. And yet technologies like that are really only about 80% there. So that's good for some purposes, but for a lot of autonomous purposes, that's not good enough. So, you know, that's talking about, you know, AI has progressed robotics quite a lot, but there are some areas where I don't even know if AI is going to be able to solve them. For example, the explainability in a lot of the ways that deep learning works, it doesn't exist. It's really impossible to have explainability. And there are a lot of things that if the physical safety of people is going to be dependent on it, then we're going to ask for a level of explainability that is simply not possible.
Thank you, Andra. So there is still a long way to go, if there is even in the relation.
Yes, and I don't know if the current that research is heading, although I was reading a really interesting paper from MIT this week about developing better explainability, but it's really more about estimating confidence levels. And estimating a confidence level is really good for some jobs, but it's not quite the same as the absolutely predictable. So when we're looking at commercializing robotics, we have to be very, this is where a company like Dusty Robotics has found an application area where they're going to be doing good and they're not going to be doing harm. And very often I talk to very smart founders who've come up with an idea and they think it's great. And I'm like, it's great if it works. But the problem with your idea is that if it doesn't work, it's really bad. You know, or even if it just doesn't work once in 100 times, then it's really bad. And to have that significant cost of failure, you have to think about that just as much as you think about how good it's going to be if you get it right. So I try to steer startups towards looking at something where they're considering the cost of failure just as much as they're considering the price of success or the value of success.
Yes, yes, yes. It's very understandable what you're saying. Thank you for your answer. And the other question, and I think it will be our last one probably. I will encourage again our participants to write down any question if you have, because we are already coming to the end of our Q&A session. So if you want to make one final question to Andra, please write it down now. And I'm reading the one that we have here from Mr. Lars Lonenberger. So how do you see the opportunities for robotics in healthcare? Do you see chances in a specific area of healthcare or in specific countries?
Across the world, we've seen a real watershed moment. Now, I'm aware of fantastic things happening in surgical robotics, but the deployment of robots in any other area, you know, broadly speaking, telehealth, was always bogged down in regulatory issues. But because of the COVID situation, almost everybody is saying, you know, we want to see robots that help us. And we're willing to look at certifying them or look at deploying them and having trials. And I think we can do so much with telehealth. And starting with just telecommunication, simply video communication, which we've had to see deployed so often in quarantines. And now if we add a little bit of mobility to that, so it becomes telepresence, and or start to look at, say, adding the ability to do a task at a distance. You know, when we simply don't have enough people physically present, then all of those little steps are now being valued very highly. And so this is opening the field of telehealth or robotics in healthcare wide open and across the world.
Thank you, Andra. That's a very important thing nowadays, and let's hope that we can find some ways of making these two big areas come together, robotics and healthcare, to also improve our current situation. So we don't have any other questions from our participants, and we have already reached more or less our running time for the session today. So I would thank you so much, Andra, for the presentation of today and for having accepted to be here with us, presenting your knowledge and your work. I think it was a very interesting webinar. I'm saying this for our community and also for me in particular. I really liked hearing your presentation and the information you shared with us. So thank you so much. We will be wrapping up the session now, so I will remind our participants that if you'd like to get in contact with us, here are again our contacts, our website and our email. And if you have any other question to Andra, you can also email us and we will be glad to put you in contact and to provide a bridge here to potential collaboration probably. So thank you, Andra. Thank you so much. Have a nice day here, there in the US, and a nice evening to our attendees from Europe. Thank you so much and see you in the next time. Thank you.
Bye now.